My boyfriend was having an affair with my father. Imagine discovering the two men you trust most, your father and your boyfriend, have been secretly betraying you together. A hotel receipt, hidden messages, and 6 weeks of silent horror reveal a truth that shatters everything you thought love and family meant.
My name is Maya, and I am 27 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my life split open in the quietest, most ordinary way possible. Not with screaming or accusations or a dramatic discovery, but with my phone battery dying at the worst possible moment, and me reaching into my boyfriend Daniel's car just looking for a charger, not suspicious, not angry, not expecting anything at all, and my fingers brushing against folded paper tucked behind the insurance card in the glove compartment. And when I pulled it out, I didn't even understand what I was looking at first. Just a receipt, thick, glossy, expensive looking, and it took a few seconds for the words to register. Harborline Suites, check-in Friday, check-out Sunday, room 612, 2 guests, paid in cash, and my stomach dropped because Friday was the night Daniel told me he'd be working late, finishing a proposal for a client, and the same Friday my father told my mother he would be attending an overnight church retreat out of town. And I remember sitting there in the driver's seat, staring at the receipt, telling myself over and over that there had to be a reasonable explanation, that this was probably old or work-related or something I wasn't understanding, because my brain was trying to protect me from what my body already knew. I sat there for a long time, long enough for my hands to start shaking, long enough for my throat to feel tight, long enough for panic to creep in quietly. And then I noticed the itemized charges: couple's spa package, champagne, dinner for 2, breakfast service for 2. And that was the moment my body reacted before my mind could catch up, and I leaned forward and threw up into a plastic grocery bag I kept in the car, because suddenly nothing made sense anymore, and everything made sense at the same time. I folded the receipt back exactly the way I found it and slid it back into the glove compartment because I didn't want Daniel to know yet, not because I was protecting him, but because I needed time to understand what I was seeing. And when I drove home that night, the world looked exactly the same. Red lights, traffic signs, people walking their dogs, and it felt unreal, like I was the only one who knew that something invisible and catastrophic had already happened. Daniel came home late that night, close to midnight, smelling like hotel soap and mint, and he kissed my cheek, apologized for being exhausted, said the meeting ran long, said he loved me, and I nodded and smiled and asked if he wanted leftovers, and he said he was too tired and went straight to the shower, and I sat on the couch staring at the wall, listening to the water run, realizing that for the first time in 4 years, I didn't recognize the man I was living with. The next morning, my mother called, cheerful, talking about how refreshing the retreat had been for my father, how he sounded lighter, how spiritual weekends always grounded him, and I held the phone to my ear, gripping it tightly, because I had never once in my life questioned my parents' marriage. They were steady, dependable, boring in the best way, and my father had always been the safe place, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, how to drive, how to choose men who respected me, and the thought that his name might somehow be connected to that receipt made me feel physically ill. I didn't confront anyone that weekend. I moved through the days quietly, watched, listened, waited, because part of me still believed I was wrong, that there was some missing piece that would make everything click back into place. But instead, the cracks widened, and things I had never paid attention to before started screaming at me. Daniel's phone never leaving his side, my father suddenly unavailable when he used to call every Sunday evening, Daniel showering the moment he got home even when he hadn't worked out, my father avoiding eye contact at family dinner, the way Daniel stiffened whenever my father's name came up, and the way my father stopped asking about Daniel entirely, like distance itself could erase something. On Monday, I logged in to our shared phone plan, something I had never done before because trust had never been a question, and when the call history loaded, I felt my chest tighten, because my father's number appeared again and again, dozens of times over the last month, long late-night calls, calls during work hours, calls overlapping with the same windows where Daniel said he was at the gym or stuck in traffic, and my father said he was volunteering or meeting with the church council, and I scrolled until my vision blurred, because the pattern was undeniable. Still, I didn't scream or cry or call anyone, because certainty matters when your entire reality is on the line, and so I watched and waited, and on Wednesday afternoon when Daniel said he needed to run errands, I followed him, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to, and I kept a safe distance, heart pounding, palms sweating, telling myself I would turn around at any moment, and then he pulled into the Harborline Suites parking garage, and parked and walked inside without hesitation, and I sat frozen until 20 minutes later when my father's car pulled in, and he walked through the same bedroom doors without looking around, and that was the moment something inside me shut down, because the man I loved and the man who raised me were inside a hotel together. I stayed there long after they disappeared, sat gripping the steering wheel until my hands cramped, because I needed my body to catch up to what my mind was refusing to process. And when I finally drove home, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt hollow, like everything meaningful had been scooped out of me, leaving only quiet disbelief. That night, Daniel talked about future plans, about vacations, about maybe starting ring shopping after the holidays, and I nodded and smiled and realized with terrifying clarity that he was planning an exit, not a future, that he was already emotionally gone and just waiting for the right moment to leave cleanly, and I understood then that whatever was happening between him and my father was not new or accidental or fleeting, it was planned. I found the messages 2 days later, hidden inside an encrypted app Daniel never mentioned, conversations filled with careful language, timing discussions, promises of honesty later, reassurances that my mother and I would eventually understand, because love was complicated, because they had been hiding who they were for too long, because living in secrecy was exhausting, and reading those words hurt more than the betrayal, because they weren't just lying, they were rewriting the damage as something brave. They planned to tell us after New Year's, after the holidays, after one last stretch of pretending, and I realized I had 6 weeks where they thought their secret was safe, and I didn't waste a single day. I documented everything, screenshots, call logs, receipts, locations. I separated finances, opened a new account, secured my documents. I spoke to a therapist, I spoke to a lawyer, not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to be blindsided when they finally decided to choose themselves and discard the rest of us. I watched Daniel carefully, noticed how guilt made him kinder, how he brought flowers, how he planned date nights, how he kissed my forehead like reassurance could erase betrayal, and I played my role perfectly, because sometimes survival means silence. The confrontation didn't happen the way they planned. It happened on a Tuesday evening when I invited my parents over for dinner, when Daniel sat beside me smiling, relaxed, thinking he was safe, and I placed the evidence on the table calmly, one piece at a time, and watched my mother's face change, watched my father crumble, watched Daniel understand that secrecy doesn't soften truth, it sharpens it. There was crying, begging, denial, screaming, apologies, explanations about confusion, about identity, about love, and I listened quietly, because I had already grieved them weeks ago, and when the noise finally stopped, I stood up and said I was leaving, and I did. I moved out that night. My mother filed for divorce days later. Daniel moved in with my father briefly, until reality replaced fantasy, and whatever they thought they had collapsed under the weight of exposure, because something built in secrecy does not survive daylight, and I learned that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who taught you what love was supposed to look like.
I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on a borrowed mattress at a friend's apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying my mother's face over and over, the way confusion turned into horror, the way realization hollowed her eyes, the way my father couldn't even look at her once the truth was laid bare. And the strangest part was that I didn't miss Daniel. I missed the version of my life I thought was real, the safety, the predictability, the idea that the people closest to me would never intentionally destroy me. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from Daniel, apologies, explanations, voice notes filled with tears, promises that he loved me, that he never meant to hurt me, that he was confused, that he was finally being honest, and every word felt meaningless, because honesty after betrayal isn't honesty, it's damage control, and I blocked his number. Not out of anger, but out of necessity, because hearing him made my chest tighten like I was being pulled backward into something I had already escaped. My mother didn't call for 2 days, and when she finally did, her voice sounded unfamiliar, fragile, like someone much older, and she didn't ask how I was. She just said, "I don't know who he is anymore." And I realized she wasn't talking about my father. She was talking about her entire marriage, the life she had built, the trust she had anchored herself to for decades. And I told her she didn't have to be strong for me, because she had already been betrayed enough. My father tried to reach me once, left a voicemail saying he wanted to explain, that he loved me, that none of this meant he was abandoning me, and I deleted it without listening to the rest, because love that requires this much destruction isn't love, it's selfishness dressed up as truth. The story spread quietly at first, family whispers, church members suddenly distant, friends asking careful questions, and my mother moved through it like someone underwater, filing paperwork, meeting lawyers, sleeping in guest rooms, and I stayed nearby, not living with her, but close enough to show up when she needed silence more than conversation. Daniel and my father moved in together briefly, a decision that felt rushed, desperate, like they were clinging to each other because everything else had burned. And people talked.
Neighbors stared, acquaintances avoided eye contact, and I heard through relatives that the relationship was already straining because secrecy had been the glue, and without it, they had nothing to protect them from reality. I went back to work, pretending I was functional, taking meetings, answering emails, smiling when required, and breaking down in my car afterward. Because grief doesn't announce itself, it ambushes you in grocery aisles and parking lots and quiet moments when you least expect it. And therapy helped, not because it erased the pain, but because it gave it somewhere to exist without consuming me. Weeks passed, then months, and the intensity softened, not gone, but quieter, like a scar that still ached when pressed, and my mother finalized the divorce and sold the house and started over in a smaller place, with sunlight and plants and a sense of peace I hadn't seen in her for years. And one night, she admitted something that stunned me. She said, "I think I was lonely even before this happened," and I realized betrayal often exposes cracks that were already there. Daniel tried again months later, showing up where I worked, asking to talk, saying he had ended things, saying he made the biggest mistake of his life, and I looked at him, standing there, smaller somehow, diminished, and I felt nothing, not anger, not longing, just distance, and I told him gently that love doesn't survive disrespect, and that I had already closed that door. I never confronted my father again, not directly, there was nothing left to say, and eventually the space between us became permanent, not dramatic, not loud, just absence. And absence taught me that family is not defined by blood, but by behavior, by who protects you when protecting you costs them something. A year passed, then another, and life rebuilt itself slowly. New routines, new laughter, new trust earned carefully. And one day I realized the story no longer hurt to tell, because it no longer defined me. It was just something that happened, not something I was. And sometimes, when people ask how I survived losing the man I loved and the man who raised me at the same time, I tell them the truth. I survived because I refused to let betrayal decide the rest of my life. I chose honesty even when it hurt. I chose myself when others didn't. And I learned that healing isn't forgiving people who destroy you. It's walking forward without carrying their shame. Time didn't fix everything, but it changed the weight of it. The days stopped feeling like emergencies and started feeling survivable. I moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city, nothing fancy, but quiet, with windows that let in morning light and a sense that this space belonged only to me. My mother came over often at first, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit, and one evening she finally told me she had met my father in person for the first time since the confrontation, not to reconcile, not to argue, but to close the door properly. She said he cried, said he had been confused, said he had spent years suppressing parts of himself, said he never meant to hurt us, and she listened calmly before telling him that intent did not erase impact, that self-discovery did not justify betrayal, that loving someone did not mean destroying everyone else in the process. She said walking away from that conversation felt harder than the divorce papers, but also cleaner, like setting something heavy down for the first time. After that, she slept better, laughed more, started taking pottery classes again, the same ones she quit years earlier because she said she never had time, and watching her rebuild herself taught me something important, that loss can hollow you out, but it can also make room for parts of you that never had space to exist. Daniel faded from my life in stages, first through blocked numbers and ignored emails, then through mutual friends who stopped mentioning him altogether, and finally through indifference, the kind that sneaks up on you when you realize you no longer replay conversations in your head or wonder what you could have done differently, because the truth is, there was nothing I could have done to stop someone else from choosing deception. The relationship between Daniel and my father didn't survive either. I heard fragments through distant relatives and secondhand conversations, arguments fueled by resentment, guilt turning into blame, the reality of being seen instead of hidden, exposing all the things secrecy once protected. And when it ended quietly, no dramatic fallout, just two people left with the consequences of choices they could not undo. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, only confirmation. Confirmation that what they thought was love had been an escape, and escapes rarely last once the door closes behind you. I didn't feel revenge. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief, quiet and slow, like a tide finally retreating from a shore I had been drowning on. Over time, my life filled with new things, work that challenged me, friendships that deepened, mornings that didn't start with anxiety, and eventually someone new. Not a whirlwind, not a replacement, but a steady presence who asked questions, respected boundaries, and never made me feel like love was something I had to earn by being patient or understanding or silent. And one afternoon, almost 2 years later, I ran into my father unexpectedly at a grocery store. We stood a few feet apart, older, changed, strangers wearing familiar faces. He asked how I was. I said I was well. He said he was trying to be better, and I believed he meant it, but belief didn't equal access, forgiveness didn't equal reconnection, and I walked away without guilt, because healing doesn't always include reunion. Sometimes it includes distance. Sometimes it includes choosing peace over closure. Now, when I think back to the girl sitting in that car, holding a hotel receipt with shaking hands, I wish I could tell her this, that the truth would hurt, but it would not break her, that losing people who betray you is not the same as losing yourself, and that walking away from something that no longer protects you is not weakness, it is survival, it is strength, and it is the beginning of a life that belongs to you.